Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special quick reaction edition of the LSU Sports Insider podcast. I'm Zach Ewing with LSU football beat writer Wilson Alexander with The Advocate. And Wilson just broke some news in the last, hour or so that LSU is hiring Kyle Williams as its defensive line coach. Of course, lost Bo Davis to the Saints last week, kind of a big loss. At least a lot of people around LSU considered it a big loss, especially in the recruiting standpoint, but also in the coaching standpoint. So what the Tigers do, Wilson, is go out and get, just one of the more popular players in recent school history. A guy who spent 13 years in the NFL. He was a very popular member of the Buffalo Bills and, of course, won the 2003 national championship with LSU.
That's right. This is a hire that's a little bit of a risk. Kyle Williams has never coached at the college level, and so now you're replacing a guy in Bo Davis who is regarded widely as one of the best defensive line coaches in the country and have been doing this for 30 or so years. Maybe not quite that long, but in coaching for a very long time and coaching at a high level for decades, certainly. That with a guy who hasn't done it at this level yet. He was recently the defensive coordinator at Ruston High School. He was a very successful one for the past 5 years, helped them win a state championship. LSU's hoping he'll help them win a national championship, a state title a couple of years back, and on the way to doing so, they allowed like 15 points a game. So, as a player and as what he's done so far as a high school coach, a lot of success. But this will be his first stop at this kind of level. And but this is the expectation, is that this will get done. A deal has not been finalized as of Thursday afternoon, sources told me. And that's important to note just in case something does get hung up here. But the expectation is that Kyle Williams will be LSU's next defensive line coach.
Yeah, it's certainly an out-of-the-box hire if, as you said, goes through, and it is important to note that
it should. I would be shocked if it did not. But yes, there are those little caveats that we have to note.
Barring something unexpected, as we like to say. Yeah. So, but yeah, and you hit it on the nose. Actually, Bo Davis started as a graduate assistant at LSU in 1995 as a 20-year-old. So he has been, around for literally 30 years. So this is a little bit different because 30 years ago, Kyle Williams was like in middle school. And then, obviously went on to great success as a player, a well-respected player, I think, both at LSU and with the Bills. I don't know if people remember, he retired in, I think, 2018, and it was right when Buffalo was starting to get good. And so for most of his career in Buffalo, they were not any good, but he was a beloved player, and not just by the fans and the locals, but you could tell he was beloved in that locker room and by the coaching staff and stuff. And so I think on a certain level, it makes sense that he would get into coaching. But as you say, man, from Ruston High School to Tiger Stadium, it's a big difference, and it's going to be a steep learning curve, I think, for him.
Yeah, it will be in some respects, I think. But maybe it's helpful that he's only coaching the defensive tackles. Kevin Peoples is still going to be the edge rushers coach at LSU. They like to split that defensive line to give really specific coaching to the ends and to the tackles. And he had a very successful career as a defensive tackle. There's a funny little note in his old LSU bio that says that if he wasn't a professional football player, he tried to be a professional golfer. He had shot 71 at one point and like a single-digit handicap, but he did pretty well for himself as a football player. And the hope is that he'll be able to sort of take what he was able to do as a player, all the technique that he had to succeed for a long time, both at the college level and then in the NFL, and be able to pass that along to a really young group of defensive tackles. LSU's headlined at the defensive tackle position by sophomores Ahmad Bro, who he coached at Ruston High School, and Dominic McKinley. But it's got 5 newcomers who are all underclassmen. Jacobian Guillory's coming off of an Achilles. He's the oldest guy there. There's a lot of young faces in that defensive line room, and maybe Kyle can kind of develop that group. The big question, I think, is going to really be the recruiting. This is LSU's got to continue to bring in talent at that defensive tackle position, and he's going to have to hit the ground running with that. But maybe again, he'll have some help potentially with like Kevin Peoples and Blake Baker and the rest of the staff to make sure that he's able to do that successfully. And the other thing about it is he's a guy with a lot of Louisiana ties, and LSU has continually added that to the staff, and that could come in handy as he's recruiting what is a strong defensive tackle crop in this 2026 class.
Yeah, no doubt. It's, I think, a season in a lot of ways set up for success for LSU, but they do have these question marks. And the latest one now is this defensive line coach who's a rookie, and they're going to need to bring him along They do have those veteran coaches on staff to help him do that. But as LSU begins spring football, Wilson, do you get the sense that this was a guy who they targeted as soon as they knew they were losing Bo Davis, or was it more of a scramble hire? I mean, I know there was a rumor that Al Davis, who coached under Blake Baker at Missouri, was one of the guys that they were looking at. It's hard to tell exactly who they turned to first, but what's your impression of how this all went down?
Yeah, it's hard to know for sure exactly how many people LSU targeted, but I know according to sources there were multiple candidates who they considered. Gerald Chapman was someone who they approached about the job at Florida. According to The Athletic, he turned down the job. That was something that obviously didn't come to fruition. The day the report about Al Davis surfaced, multiple sources refuted that, the expectation was ever that they were going to hire him. If he was considered, it never got to that point. And so it's hard to really know for sure kind of at what point was Kyle Williams identified in this? Who else did they target? I don't know that we'll ever fully know that. But there were multiple candidates for this. LSU considered a few different people for this job and reached out through back channels and such to inquire about a number of candidates. But obviously now it ends up settling on Kyle Williams, who that kind of came together, I think, over the past 24 hours or so, where it became clear he was the target for this job. And then as of this afternoon, it became, sources confirmed that a deal was in the works and that he was the target for this position. And now they just have to kind of finalize that job. You mentioned how spring practice starts on Saturday. A little unclear if he's going to be in the door, in the building for the first day of practice on Saturday, but it's really not a huge deal if he isn't. If it has to come, day 2 or day 3 or something like that, just to get the paperwork all finished out, that's okay. Because I mean, the first day they're just going to be kind of running around in helmets. But I think it was good on LSU here, right? A week exactly. Today is a week after news broke that Bo Davis was leaving for the Saints. By our Luke Johnston had that story. That LSU now has got its target for this job, and not going to have to go through the spring with Kevin Peoples coaching both the defensive tackles and the defensive ends, because that would have been the solution in the short term, never the long term plan for that. He was always going to just be the defensive end coach, and they were going to hire somebody else for the tackles. But in the interim, he might have had to handle both, which is something he's done in his career before. But now you don't have to do that. Kyle Williams will be able to kind of step right in and take care of that defensive tackle room.
Yeah, and I used the word scramble. I mean, when you lose an assistant coach on, what was it, February 27th, there's always going to be an element of scrambling. Like, that's late in the game to be replacing an assistant coach. But it seems like LSU obviously has a guy with an NFL pedigree here. And, bottom line, someone that they wanted to add to this staff who, as you said, has in-state ties and completes that staff once again.
Absolutely. And I mean, and like you said, he's a guy who was really beloved both at LSU previously when he was a player, and then in Buffalo too, fan favorite. I mean, he was elected to the Greater Buffalo Sports Hall of Fame just a couple of years ago. And Sean McDermott, upon Kyle's retirement, said, like, we need more Kyle Williamses. He was endearing to that locker room. And that you could see different clips of him, and also even just when he was at Ruston, a lot of passion that he will bring to this job. And so, it's a big break for him in his career, for him to be a college defensive line coach, and LSU is sort of banking on what he was able to do as a player, translating into being able to be a successful and high-level college coach.
All right. He's Wilson Alexander. Broke the news that LSU is expected to hire Kyle Williams as its defensive line coach. Just wanted to do a quick reaction video here. We are going to do a full football podcast on the LSU Sports Insider on Monday, Wilson, with spring practice starting. Give us a sneak preview of maybe what we'll be talking about Monday.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that, kind of getting into the weeds into spring football as much as I guess one can get into the weeds on spring football, because you never want to make too much of what happens in March. But we'll talk, I think, a good bit about the battle that's coming on the offensive line. There's going to be a lot of competition up front, what to expect in the secondary. Those are probably the two big things that we'll be watching for this spring, but also just tons of new players. They brought in these 16 transfers. There's 13 early enrollees, and a lot of these guys are going to be pushing for early playing time. So we're going to break all that down, tell everybody the names they need to know as LSU gets started with spring ball.
All right. He's Wilson Alexander. I'm Zach Ewing. This is an LSU Sports Insider quick reaction. Again, we'll be back with a full football episode on Monday as we continue to build things out at the LSU Tigers at NOLA.com YouTube channel. Hit the like button for us, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you next week.